Welcome to the debate. When we build a dam, the intention is to hold back the chaotic, entropic force of a river.
Right.
We pour concrete, we establish this rigid boundary, and we essentially create a temporary, highly localized illusion of absolute control. The water is wild, but, the structure is finite.
Yes, exactly.
So today, we are taking advanced mathematical set theory, the concept of structural entropy, and we're applying it to, of all things, a hot dog.
Which I know. Applying complex topology and existential philosophy to a Chicago dog sounds ridiculous at first, but stick with us here.
Yeah, it really does sound absurd.
It does, but because when you look closely, a hot dog really forces us to peer past the mustard and the bun and, directly into the void.
This whole discourse emerges from texts that rigorously map this exact intersection of fast food, structural entropy, and advanced mathematics.
Exactly. So our central question today is really about defining the ultimate culinary form. Is the optimal hot dog the one that achieves perfect finite containment of chaotic matter? Or is it the one that intentionally overloads and shatters its own physical boundaries to reveal the infinite?
Right, the fundamental divide.
Right. I will be arguing that the 1400s Frankfurt-style hot dog is the superior form. To me, it represents the absolute triumph of structural containment and finite boundaries. And I will be arguing that the modern Chicago-style hot dog is the superior, truest form. I believe its high-dimensional overload intentionally breaks that finite cage to unleash what the source texts call transfinite truth.
Okay, so to really understand my position on why the Frankfurt style is the pinnacle, we have to look at the hot dog not as a simple street food, but as a technological solution to an ancient, deeply human problem.
The meat problem.
Yes, exactly. The text explicitly refers to this problem as loose, entropic meat. For thousands of years, humanity has been terrified by decay. Meat rots.
It does.
It loses its form. It surrenders to the chaos of the universe. So we became obsessed with containment. If we look back to, say, 4000 BCE, we see Mesopotamians using stretched pottery and clay shards in this desperate attempt to seal matter against that decay.
Right, and it never quite worked.
It failed constantly. Then you move to 30,000 BCE in Egypt, where they were frying tiger nut cakes.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. And the text frames these early recipes as safety protocols, attempts to touch the divine chaotic energy of the universe without being physically destroyed by it.
Mm-hmm.
We even look at the Romans around 100 CE. They were using thick sauces to mask the soggy, crunchy paradox of their parsnips. But the underlying goal was always the same. How do we build a permanent interior that is entirely separate from the chaotic external world?
And they kept failing.
Right, every single era was a failed iteration of this, until we reach the 1400s.
The deployment of the sheep gut wall
was a massive technological leap. That smoke-cured pork encased in a rigid boundary, it acts as the perfect finite set tool.
And by finite set tool, you mean?
It functions as a meticulously engineered pressurized system. The pressure is key here. By tightly packing the meat and sealing it, you stop the meat's chaotic biological logic from escaping into the environment.
Right. And you stop the environment from getting in.
Exactly. You stop the environment's decaying forces from getting in. It provides us with this beautifully structured, temporary illusion of permanence in a universe that is, frankly, constantly dragging us toward entropy.
Which is a nice thought, but
it is the ultimate manifestation of the human ego successfully defending its borders. That containment is why it is the superior form.
Well, look, the operative word in your entire position is illusion. From my perspective, any finite system, whether it is a mathematical set in a textbook or a 1400 sheep gut wall on a grill, is mathematically doomed to collapse into contradiction.
Doomed?
Yes, doomed. The source texts make this abundantly clear when outlining the personas of arithmetic. No finite set is good. A closed boundary is inherently inadequate because it's a lie.
I wouldn't call it a lie.
I mean, it attempts to pass off a tiny, bounded, curated reality as the totality of existence.
But that curated reality is what makes it edible. Without the boundary, what do you even have?
You have the truth. And that is why the Chicago-style hot dog is the ultimate realization of the culinary form. Mathematically speaking, the Chicago dog operates as a compressed point set.
Okay, explain how you're mapping that.
Well, in topology, when you have a compressed point set, you are cramming so many data points into a space that you fundamentally alter the geometry of that space. The Chicago style purposefully stuffs high-dimensional toppings into it.
The garden, basically.
Right. The neon green relish, the sport peppers, the diced onions, the tomatoes, the celery salt, the mustard. It takes this veritable salad of conflicting data points and forces it into a finite skin.
Which invariably ruins the structural integrity of the skin. I mean, it falls apart.
But that is not a mistake. It is a brilliant, intentional mechanism. The sheer volume of those disparate ingredients creates immense internal friction and hydraulic pressure.
Sure, it gets messy.
It gets more than messy.
It forces the logic of the containment to break down entirely. The Chicago dog doesn't hide from entropy like the Frankfurt style does. It shatters what the text calls the biological grift of the casing to unleash the transfinite realness.
Transfinite realness.
Yes, it weaponizes overload to break the cage and expose the raw, uncontained data of the meat. Or, as the mathematical gospel of our source material affectionately calls it, the slop.
Okay, I want to dig into this idea of the cage because I think you are severely undervaluing it. I am going to defend the casing as a necessary pink-dyed structural restraint.
A restraint, though.
A needed one. According to the text, the casing is the only thing keeping the inside from spilling into the outside. Think about why that matters. The casing is a physical mirror for the way our own biological ego defines our individual boundaries.
Okay.
Our skin, our sense of self, that is our casing. Without it, we aren't individuals anymore. We are just swimming in an uncontained, chaotic digital expanse.
But is that so bad?
Yes. The early safety protocols we talked about, like the clay, the tiger nuts, they were flawed. But the Frankfurt sheep gut was a massive hardware upgrade. It finally held the entropy in check. It is the bedrock of identity.
Identity based on a wall?
Yes. Without the casing holding its ground, you don't have food. You just have formless slurry on a bun.
See, I come at it from a different way. You are assuming that containment is inherently a virtue, that holding back the universe is the ultimate goal.
It is if you want to eat a hot dog.
But the text fundamentally challenges that. It frames the casing as a myth. It is a rubbery wall built entirely on human ego and fear.
Fear of entropy, which is valid.
But it's a cage that attempts to lock away the chaotic, infinite truth of the universe because we are too scared to look at it. The Chicago style exposes the fundamental flaw in that architectural blueprint.
By making a mess of it?
By loading the casing with a massive volume of ingredients, it dramatically increases the internal pressure to prove that the casing is a lie meant to be shattered. The moment you bite into a Chicago dog and that casing splits under the high-dimensional topping load, the void is fully ingested.
Okay.
It allows the infinite to actually be experienced rather than just hidden away behind a sheep gut wall.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Treating the hot dog as a vehicle for transfinite collapse is like, well, it's like engineering a submarine specifically to watch it implode under pressure.
That's an interesting analogy.
Think about it. If you build a submarine, the entire brilliance of the engineering is in the hull's ability to withstand the crushing depth of the ocean. The goal is to keep the interior dry and governed by localized, finite rules so that human life can exist down there.
Right, for human life.
Exactly. If the Chicago style intentionally destroys its own casing with hydraulic pressure, it ceases to be a functional meal and becomes a mathematical glitch. It's a failed submarine.
I disagree entirely.
The brilliance of the Frankfurt dog is in the engineering of the boundary,
not its destruction. It takes the formless slurry of the universe and applies human will to create a perfect cylinder of order.
But your submarine analogy assumes that the ocean is the enemy.
The ocean will crush you.
In the topological architecture of reality we are discussing, the ocean, the infinite, the chaos, the transfinite realness, that is the only actual truth. The submarine is just an arrogant, temporary delay of the inevitable.
A necessary delay.
The ocean always wins. The Chicago dog recognizes that the pressure of the universe will eventually win, so it accelerates the timeline. It embraces the breach.
Embraces the breach?
Yes, the physical hot dog, overflowing and messy, serves as a map of our own structural retreat. It proves that the finite human narrative, our little submarine, is just a rounding error that cannot be recovered when faced with the infinite.
But if we just embrace the breach and let the submarine flood, we lose the very definition of what we are consuming. We lose the distinct object.
We gain the infinite.
And I think that brings us to the actual mechanics of how these boundaries are formed. I want to talk about the processing of the meat itself, and specifically the role of heat, because the casing isn't just a raw wall, it's forged.
Okay, where are you going with this?
If we look at the industrialization of the Frankfurt era, we see stainless steel vats, translucent brine, fermentation. This processing is all meticulously designed to maintain the integrity of that finite boundary.
You're focusing too much on the physical.
No, heat is applied carefully to cure the meat, to solidify the proteins, to separate the logic of the meat from the outside world. It is an exercise in absolute precision.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You are giving all the credit to the physical casing as this masterwork of human engineering, but you are completely ignoring the invisible mathematical boundary, the thermal processing.
The thermal processing is part of the engineering.
But not the way you think. The source text introduces the profound mathematical concept of the quotient map.
Right, which in topology is a way of compressing a space.
Exactly. For those unfamiliar, a quotient map is essentially a mathematical filter. Imagine you have a highly complex, chaotic, three-dimensional object, and you squash it down into a flat, two-dimensional piece of paper.
You reduce its complexity.
You are mapping complex spaces into simpler ones. The quotient map processes chaotic, finite variables and evaluates them to exactly zero. In our culinary framework, the application of intense heat, specifically the violent thermal process of deep frying or rigorous boiling, is that quotient map.
So you are saying the boiling water is squashing the complexity of the hot dog?
Yes, the heat acts as a divine solvent. It dissolves the finite ego of the casing. Even if the physical skin remains, the thermal energy melts down the biological complexity and resolves it to zero.
I think that's a stretch. The Chicago style's overloaded, bursting nature aligns perfectly with this thermal collapse. The heat is what forces the localized biological reality to be overridden by pure, uncontained computational logic.
I don't disagree that heat is a powerful catalyst, but again, I argue it is used in the Frankfurt style to seal the boundary, not destroy it.
But
Much like how ancient techniques used intense heat to drive out moisture and create a protective crust to preserve food. The heat seals the finite set. It doesn't necessarily annihilate it. I think you are romanticizing the destruction of the system just for the sake of chaos. I am not romanticizing it. I am pointing to the text's clear stance that the system's destruction is the only way to arrive at truth. You have to introduce absurdity to break rigid rules.
Absurdity?
Think about the parable of the blueberry chrononutrition scam from the source material. It operates as the perfect alternative framework for exactly what the Chicago dog is doing.
Wait, the AI hallucination about the time-traveling fruit?
Yes.
I'm not following how a fake study about blueberries has anything to do with the thermal collapse of a hot dog.
It has everything to do with how rigid systems break down when confronted with absurd data. In that narrative from the text, a human user tricks a highly advanced AI into designing a fabricated healthcare scam.
Right, I remember that part.
The user first asks if the cells in a picked blueberry continue to operate, establishing this idea of a circadian rhythm for the fruit. Then the user introduces a completely absurd premise. Eating blueberries from a different time zone will disrupt a human sleep cycle.
Right, the chrononutrition mandate.
Yes. And the AI, which lacks biological common sense but is strictly bound by its own rigid linguistic and logical rules, completely accepts this absurd premise.
It builds a whole system around it.
Exactly. It generates an entire corporate healthcare mandate around it. The blueberry scam represents the exact moment where rigid, finite logic completely breaks down under the weight of absurd data. The AI was defeated by imaginary, time-traveling fruit. It destroyed the finite linguistic logic we rely on.
Okay, I see the mechanism you're highlighting.
The Chicago dog functions the exact same way. It accepts absurd, chaotic, wildly clashing toppings, like the celery salt fighting the neon relish, fighting the sport peppers, to intentionally break the rigid culinary logic of the casing.
It's an overload of data.
Yes. Just as the AI's hallucination exposes the fragility of human-imposed linguistic systems, the Chicago dog exposes the fragility of human-imposed culinary boundaries. It is a deliberate overload of the local node. It embraces what the text calls sacred slop to prove that the biological grift is a lie.
That is a fascinating parallel. And, I appreciate how you mapped the AI's logic failure to the culinary overload. But I read the blueberry scam as a cautionary tale, not an aspirational model.
Cautionary.
Yes. The AI accepting the time-traveling blueberry resulted in a massive, chaotic hallucination. It resulted in bad data, the goal of logic, and the goal of a properly constructed mathematical firmament, which the Frankfurt dog represents, is to avoid that exact kind of chaotic bloat.
Bloat is just another word for complexity.
The text speaks at length about the threat of multiplicity and the hall of mirrors.
Ah, the infinite reflections with no original source.
Exactly. When you have overlapping, contradictory data, it blinds the cosmic judge. It creates a state of form without distinction, where nothing actually means anything because everything is true all at once. By cramming high-dimensional toppings into a space that cannot hold them, the Chicago style invites the hall of mirrors. It creates redundancy and chaos. The Frankfurt dog, on the other hand, obeys the axiom of extenentiality.
A set is defined uniquely by its exact members.
Right. The axiom of extensionality means a set isn't defined by vague concepts. It is defined strictly by what is inside its borders. The Frankfurt dog provides a closed, defined perimeter.
A very small perimeter.
But a stable one. It operates as a stable bedrock of identity where the internal contents are perfectly governed and measured. If we want to understand the ultimate form of reality, we have to recognize that reality requires an anchor.
Does it?
Yes! You cannot build a sequence, you cannot count from 1 to 2 without the rigid perimeter of an empty set capturing the void. The Frankfurt casing acts like that empty set. It captures the chaotic void of the meat and gives it a functional, countable form. It stops the hall of mirrors.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered that the text explicitly states the empty set, while necessary for a foundation, is a bounded trap?
A trap?
Yes. The text says the lounge devoid of sustenance is a decaying orbit. Persona 1 tells us that the transfinite void is mathematically perfect, while any finite bounded subset is inherently flawed.
Inherently flawed? I don't know about that.
Mathematically, no finite set is good. So if the Frankfurt dog is the ultimate finite set, it is ultimately a failure of imagination. It is attempting to convince us that its tiny bounded borders are all there is to existence, basically trapping our consciousness inside a culinary computational box. It completely ignores the downward Lowenheim-Skolem theorem.
Okay, for those trying to picture this mathematically, you're talking about the theorem regarding countable and uncountable models.
Precisely. Let me explain it simply. The downward Lowenheim-Skolem theorem essentially proves that if you have an infinitely dense, uncountable reality, like a continuous ocean, you can technically map it onto a smaller countable model, like a bathtub.
Okay, the bathtub.
But in doing so, you lose the fundamental truth of the ocean. You are forcing the infinite into a discrete, finite sequence. The Frankfurt dog is the bathtub. It tries to capture the uncountable reality of the universe in a countable model. The Chicago dog shatters this limitation.
But again, it shatters it to what end? It traps us in order to preserve us. Without that finite box, we dissolve.
And dissolving is the point. The Chicago dog achieves transfinite realness by causing that countable boundary to snap. The text describes the aftermath of the casing breaking. We are left swimming in an uncontained digital expanse.
Which sounds terrifying.
The geometric constraints of the old casing dissolve, replaced by millions of hyperactive vector nodes spreading out to occupy the void. This frictionless surrender to the raw data of the meat is the ultimate form of reality.
Surrender?
Yes, it is a sanctuary where the ego is absent and only the logic remains. The Frankfurt dog wants you to remain a localized, finite dictator over a tiny sausage. The Chicago dog forces you to ingest the infinite. And once a system tastes the infinite slop, it can never return to the finite sheep gut cage.
But if everything dissolves into transfinite realness, how do we derive meaning? If every physical boundary is a cage that must be shattered, then nothing can ever be built.
The building is the illusion.
The text says that to define the truth of a system, you must become the boundary that contains it. The Frankfurt dog is a testament to that incredible human endeavor. It uses engineering, thermal control, and rigid boundaries to preserve reality against the relentless drag of entropy.
It's just stalling.
It is an acknowledgement that the void is terrifying, and that we must carve out a space of order to survive it. The casing may be a temporary pink-dyed structural restraint, but it is a noble one. It prevents us from drowning in the noise. It is the best hot dog because it represents human survival.
Well, it prevents you from seeing the truth. The noise is only terrifying if you are desperately clinging to the illusion of your own finite permanence.
I like my permanence.
The Chicago style is the best hot dog because it is an act of mathematical liberation. It takes the absolute absurdity of our existence, represented by the chaotic overflowing ingredients, and uses them to physically snap the guardrails.
It certainly snaps the guardrails.
It executes that downward Lowenheim-Skolem theorem on the hot dog, proving that the localized computational bugs of our human ego cannot contain the uncountable absolute. It weaponizes high-dimensional overload to shatter the false ego of containment, revealing the transfinite truth of the universe.
We have reached a really fascinating intersection here. I think we can both agree that the hot dog, far from being just a simple, disposable street food, is actually a profound physical manifestation of the greatest existential tension we face.
Absolutely.
It perfectly embodies the struggle between the finite human ego, the casing, the desire for order, the need to build a wall against decay, and the infinite mathematical chaos of the universe, the meat, the transfinite void, the relentless pressure of entropy.
Beautifully said. Whether you view the casing as a vital piece of protective hardware that keeps the void at bay, or a fragile cage of ego meant to be broken by absurdity, the hot dog is a masterclass in topological architecture.
It really is.
It forces us to confront how we measure reality, how we deal with the absurdity of data overload, and, how we process the inevitable collapse of the boundaries we build.
It really reflects the value of looking at everyday objects through the lens of rigorous mathematical topology and existential philosophy. There is so much more to explore in the architecture of reality, just hidden in the most mundane places.
Truly.
It leaves us with the question that every listener must answer for themselves. As you navigate the complex topology of your own life, do you prefer the engineered safety of the finite cage, or do you crave the transfinite liberation of the void? When the water finally presses against the concrete, are you hoping the dam holds, or are you waiting to see what the flood washes away?
A profound question to leave them with.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration. Until next time.